The Scarred Shepherd, How a Stray Dog Stopped a Predator. Some stories start quietly. This one started with a growl. When paramedics were called to the edge of Ashwood's forest, they didn't know what they would find. What they discovered was enough to silence even the bravest among them. A girl, small and bruised, lay beneath the body of a German shepherd. His fur was muddy, his ribs scarred, and one eye carried the look of battles long past. He refused to move. Every time someone stepped too close, his throat rumbled. Not wild, not careless, controlled. He was protecting something far more fragile than himself. The girl was still alive, barely, and the dog, unnamed and unknown, had kept her hidden and warm through a night that should have stolen her breath. They called him Argo, but names didn't matter. What mattered was the truth written in his eyes. He had seen something that made him stay. Something that would lead not just to a rescue, but to the unraveling of a secret buried in the woods. By the time the town understood, it was too late to call him a stray. He was a guardian. Ashwood was a town that liked its morning quiet. Nestled between rolling hills and thick forests, it had the kind of dawns where fog clung stubbornly to the trees, where the maple trunks looked like pale ghosts standing guard. This morning, the air was damp enough to bead along fence posts and run in silver trails down every blade of grass. The hush was complete, broken only by the faint rush of the Ashwood River, somewhere beyond the ridge, and the rhythmic cadence of two pairs of shoes striking the old jogging path. Claire Miller adjusted the sleeve of her sweatshirt, breath coming in steady clouds. She was a nurse at the county clinic and used these early runs to shake off the heaviness of her shifts. Beside her, Daniel Kerrigan, an auto shop owner who had been her running partner for years, kept pace, head bowed against the mist. Their conversations were easy and minimal, the kind born of repetition and trust. But today, the fog felt different, too thick, too heavy. Claire slowed instinctively, her ears catching something beneath the shuffle of sneakers and the beat of her own pulse, a sound that didn't belong. She held up a hand. "Wait." Daniel stopped, frowning, sweat dripping down his temple. "What is it?" The fog muffled everything, but there it was again, a low, guttural rumble that rolled through the trees like distant thunder. Claire's stomach tightened. Not thunder, not the river, something alive. They moved carefully, gravel crunching beneath their shoes, until the trail curved into a pocket of the forest where the maples grew denser, their branches knotted together like fingers laced in prayer. The ground here was darker, damp with rot and shadow. And then they saw it. A small figure lay sprawled in the mulch and leaves. A girl. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old. Her pale dress was torn, streaked with dirt and blood, and one small hand clutched a ribbon as pink as a faded sunrise. For a second, Claire thought the child was gone. The stillness was that complete. But what rooted them in place wasn't only the girl. It was the animal above her. A massive German shepherd crouched low, its body curved protectively over the child like a living shield. His fur was matted with mud, patches dark with what looked alarmingly like dried blood. His ears were flat, his breath ragged, but his eyes, sharp amber eyes, burned in the mist. The growl came again, vibrating through his chest, low and deliberate, not wild, not rabid, a warning. Daniel's breath hitched. "Jesus!" Claire instinctively lifted her hands, palms open, her training kicking in. She had dealt with frightened dogs before, but never one like this, never one so focused, so intent on its purpose. The shepherd didn't lunge, didn't snap. He only pressed closer to the girl, every muscle taut, as if he were holding the world back by sheer will. Claire whispered, almost to herself, "He's protecting her." The air thickened with a silence that pressed against their eardrums. Every detail carved itself into memory. The faint tremor in the child's hand as her ribbon slipped, the glint of moisture on the shepherd's whiskers, the way fog coiled and uncoiled around their forms. Time seemed suspended, caught between the urgency of human voices and the eerie stillness of the woods. Daniel fumbled for his phone. "I'm calling 911. His voice was too loud. The shepherd's head snapped up, eyes narrowing, growl deepening. Claire hissed, "Quiet!" and grabbed his wrist. Her own pulse thundered in her ears. She forced her voice low, steady. "Don't move too fast. He thinks we're a threat." Daniel swallowed, lowering his tone. He dialed anyway, hands trembling. "Ashwood Trail, Bridge Hollow Loop. Yeah, we found a girl, maybe 6 years old. There's—" His eyes flicked nervously to the shepherd. "There's a dog on top of her. No, not attacking, guarding." Claire crouched slowly, her knees pressing into the damp ground. She didn't move closer, only made herself small. "It's okay," she murmured, though the words were swallowed by the fog. Her eyes locked on the shepherd's. They weren't wild eyes. They weren't the eyes of a stray gone feral. They were calculating, searching, daring her to prove herself. The girl whimpered faintly, so faint Claire thought she imagined it. The shepherd responded immediately, shifting his body tighter against her, his nose brushing the crown of her tangled hair. He didn't look away from Claire, not once. Sirens cut faintly through the distance, their wail muted by trees and mist. Relief should have come, but Claire felt her chest constrict. How would the shepherd react when strangers with flashing lights and hurried steps arrived? She whispered to Daniel without looking at him. "When they get here, tell them to slow down. Tell them not to rush." Minutes dragged like hours until the faint crunch of tires on gravel announced the ambulance. Paramedics spilled out, their bright jackets shocking against the grey woods. One of them cursed softly at the sight. "Holy hell!" "Wait!" Claire snapped, her voice sharp enough to freeze them. She raised her hand, pointing toward the shepherd. "Don't rush. He's guarding her." The shepherd's growl rumbled again, louder this time, chest vibrating against the little girl. He looked like a fortress with fur, a wall of defiance built against the entire world. The paramedics hesitated. Daniel moved forward to intercept, explaining in hurried whispers. The urgency in his tone warred with the gravity of Claire's warning. And the girl was alive, maybe, but only if they could reach her, and the only thing between her and their hands was this scarred dog who refused to surrender. Claire stayed crouched, her breath fogging the cold air, heart pounding as she met the shepherd's gaze. In his eyes she saw something raw and ancient, something that spoke not of aggression but of devotion. She didn't know who he belonged to or where he had come from, but in that moment she understood. He wasn't just lying over the girl. He was keeping her tethered to life. The sirens grew louder, cutting through the fog like a blade. Their echoes bounced between the trees, jarring against the fragile silence that had settled over the clearing. The German shepherd stiffened at once. His muscles bunched, ears pinned back, and the growl in his chest deepened, rolling like distant thunder that warned of a storm. The paramedics, 2 men and a woman, moved instinctively, rushing forward with the kind of practiced urgency that saves minutes and lives. But urgency had no place here. The shepherd rose slightly from his crouch, lips curling just enough to flash the edge of white teeth. His amber eyes followed every movement, calculating, daring. The girl stirred faintly beneath him, a sound like a broken whisper leaving her throat. He pressed down again, curling his body tighter around hers, as though he believed even sound could take her away. "Back off!" Claire shouted, her voice sharp and commanding. She wasn't their superior, but something in her tone rooted the paramedics in place. Daniel lifted his hands in an almost pleading gesture. "He's protecting her," he explained breathlessly. "He hasn't hurt her. He won't let anyone near." The lead medic, a tall man named Keene, muttered under his breath, "We don't have time for this." "The kid's barely breathing." He took a tentative step forward, bag slung over his shoulder, gloves snapping on his hands. The shepherd's response was immediate. His body dropped low, head forward, growls snapping into a sharp bark that cracked through the clearing like gunfire. Keene froze. Sweat prickled at the back of his neck. "Jesus. He'll tear me apart." "Not if we do this right," said the only woman on the team. Her name was Hannah Morales, and unlike the others, she didn't reach for tools or try to strategize out loud. She simply lowered herself onto her knees in the damp soil. Slowly, deliberately, she slipped the strap of her kit bag from her shoulder and set it aside. Her movements were quiet, almost reverent. She knew dogs, though not from textbooks. She had grown up in a house with one that had never trusted anyone but her. She knew the language of lowered eyes and softened hands, the way silence could sometimes say more than words. Hannah didn't speak at first, and she let the shepherd see her, really see her. Her breathing was calm, shoulders loose. She made herself smaller, less threatening, as though she had all the time in the world. The shepherd's growl wavered, but didn't fade. His chest heaved, blood-matted fur rising and falling with each labored breath. His body trembled, not from fear, but from exhaustion, and still, he didn't move. Finally, Hannah let her voice break the quiet. It was low, soft, like a lullaby meant for ears that had long since forgotten kindness. "Hey, boy," she whispered. "You did good. You kept her safe." The shepherd's ears twitched. He didn't blink, didn't look away, but the growl eased into something rougher, almost a whine caught in his throat. "That's it," Hannah murmured, inching her hand forward but keeping it low to the ground. "No one's here to hurt her. You can rest now. You've done your job." Behind her, Keene muttered impatiently, "We're losing time." Claire shot him a glare. "Shut up." "Look at him. He understands her." The shepherd's gaze flicked between Hannah and the girl. His body swayed slightly, the toll of the night's vigil dragging at his frame. His left paw shook, pressing down harder against the child's torn dress. Hannah swallowed, letting emotion edge her voice. "You don't have to fight anymore. Let us take care of her now, please." The word "please" carried weight. Maybe it was the tone, maybe the trembling honesty in it, but something shifted in the shepherd's eyes. For the first time, he blinked, slowly, deliberately, as though acknowledging her presence. And then his body sagged, not in surrender, but in release. His legs trembled once, twice, and then folded beneath him. He pushed himself awkwardly off the girl, stumbling 2 steps back before collapsing sideways into the grass. His chest still rose and fell, but each breath sounded rougher, uneven. "Go!" Hannah snapped, breaking her stillness. Keene and the others surged forward, dropping to the girl's side. Gloves pressed against her tiny wrist, searching for pulse. Another medic tilted her chin, eyes narrowing at the faint flutter of breath. "She's alive," Keene confirmed, relief roughening his voice. "Shallow, but she's still with us." The words cracked open the tension in the clearing. Claire pressed a shaking hand to her mouth, tears threatening to spill. Daniel exhaled so hard it sounded like a sob. But even in the rush of movement, the stretcher unrolled, oxygen prepared, vitals checked. The weight of what had just happened didn't vanish. Their eyes kept flicking to the shepherd, sprawled in the grass, fur sticky with blood and mud. His chest rose shallowly, each breath a fight. Yet even collapsed, his gaze didn't waver. His head turned, eyes tracking every motion as they lifted the girl, as they secured straps and adjusted masks. He didn't bark this time, didn't growl. But the warning still lingered in those eyes, the silent promise that if he had any strength left, they would answer to him before they touched her. Hannah crouched once more, pausing by his side. She didn't reach for him. She only met his gaze and said softly, "She's safe now. You can rest." For the first time, the shepherd closed both eyes. The girl was carried swiftly toward the waiting ambulance. The paramedics moved with efficiency, urgency flooding back now that the barrier had broken. But the story spreading through their movements, through every whisper and gasp, wasn't just about a fragile child pulled back from the brink. It was about the scarred German shepherd who had kept her alive through a night that should have taken her. The ghost dog no one knew, who refused to leave her side until he could no longer stand. The fog swallowed their voices as the ambulance doors slammed shut. Somewhere behind them, the second team prepared to lift the shepherd himself onto another stretcher. He was still trembling, still fighting some unseen battle even as his body failed. But in that moment, everyone understood. Without him, there would have been no miracle to witness. The ambulance doors closed with a heavy metallic thud, sealing away the fragile rise and fall of a child's chest. The sound lingered in the fog, like the last note of a hymn, leaving the clearing hollow in its wake. For a moment no one moved, not the joggers who had stumbled onto the scene, not the sheriff's deputy who had just arrived, not even the paramedics now bent over the second stretcher where the shepherd lay collapsed. The forest seemed to hold its breath. "She's alive," Keane had said, and those two words clung to every ear, every trembling heart. Alive. Fragile, bruised, broken in ways yet to be seen, but alive. Claire stood rooted to the spot, her sneakers soaked through with dew, her hands trembling as she pressed them against her thighs. Daniel whispered something, thanks to God, thanks to luck, thanks to anything listening. But his voice cracked halfway through. They both stared as the little girl disappeared into the back of the ambulance, a pink ribbon still clutched in her hand like proof she had fought all night to hold on. But it wasn't just the girl people talked about. It was the dog. He lay stretched across the grass now, every breath rattling, his chest marked with the rise of old scars and the wet gleam of new ones. Mud caked his belly, leaves clung to his fur, and blood, his, not the girl's, darkened the earth beneath him. And yet, even in collapse, there was defiance in the tilt of his head, in the way his eyes, half-lidded, tracked the girl's stretcher until the doors closed. He had not surrendered her. He had only passed her forward. One deputy knelt near the shepherd, shaking his head. "No collar, no tag. He's not chipped either. Who the hell's dog is this?" Nobody answered. The crowd that had begun to gather, a handful of townsfolk drawn by the sirens, by the echo of the girl's scream, kept their voices low, as though standing in a church. They whispered words like guardian, protector, miracle. A farmer named Travis crossed himself, muttering that he'd seen nothing like it in all his 60 years. A teenage boy with wide eyes asked, Was he just out here? Alone? Someone replied, "Looks like he's been out here a long time." They gestured at the scar above the shepherd's right eye, a deep, pale line cutting through the fur like a white-hot memory that never healed. The scar unsettled them. It told a story of survival, but one no one could name. Hannah Morales, who had knelt so bravely in the mud minutes earlier, crouched again by the shepherd's side. Her gloved hand hovered inches above his ribs, as if afraid to touch what still vibrated with such fierce purpose. She spoke softly, for him, and perhaps for herself. "You did it, boy. You kept her alive." The shepherd's ear twitched. His eyelids fluttered, but he didn't move. Two paramedics lifted his stretcher carefully, easing his weight onto canvas and steel. Even unconscious, his body tensed when they carried him past the ambulance where the girl lay. His head turned slightly toward it, as though the invisible thread binding him to her refused to break. "Take him to Dr. Leland," Hannah instructed. "The vet clinic on Main. He'll know what to do." The deputy frowned. "Animal control should—" "No," Hannah cut him off, voice sharper than she intended. Then she softened, her eyes on the shepherd. "He's not some stray. Not anymore." The murmurs grew as people pulled out phones, snapping pictures despite the mist. In every frame, the story was the same, a scarred shepherd who had lain like a shield over a girl who should have died. By the time the second ambulance doors closed, the tale was already taking shape beyond the clearing. On Facebook pages, in hushed phone calls, in text messages racing through Ashwood, a single phrase kept repeating, "The ghost dog saved her." Nathan Cole didn't know it yet. At that very hour, he was stacking lumber by his cabin, sweat running down his back brace digging into his ribs. But the picture already on its way to his phone would stop him cold. He would see those amber eyes in a frame of fog and mud, and he would know the ghost dog that haunted his woods was no ghost at all. For now, though, the clearing held its fragile silence. The fog thickened again, swallowing sirens and footsteps, until only the whisper of leaves remained. The ribbon of pink fabric lay forgotten in the mud where the girl had clutched it. Claire bent down, picked it up gently, and brushed the dirt from it. The fabric was frayed at the edges, worn soft by small hands. She held it to her chest like a relic, whispering a prayer no one else could hear. When she finally looked up, the clearing was empty. The ambulances were gone. The joggers, the deputies, even the paramedics had vanished into the mist, leaving behind nothing but trampled grass and the faint echo of growls that had been both threat and vow. And in that emptiness, a question lingered heavier than the fog itself. Where had the dog come from? Not from any home in Ashwood, not from any kennel or rescue anyone could recall. He carried no name, no claim, nothing but scars and a loyalty that had rooted him to a child he should not have known. The forest did not answer. It only stood silent, towering and watchful, as though it too guarded its secrets. By nightfall, the whispers had already reached every porch and diner booth in Ashwood. People shook their heads in disbelief, some with tears in their eyes, others with nervous awe. They called it a miracle, not just that the girl lived, but that a dog with no master, no past anyone could trace, had chosen her, and in choosing her, had rewritten the story of a town that had forgotten how cruel the world could be. Somewhere, beneath the weight of those whispers, the first seeds of mystery took root. The morning had been like so many others for Nathan Cole, quiet, repetitive, the kind of rhythm that dulled thought. He was in his yard stacking lumber, his breath fogging in the cool air, the brace on his back digging sharply with every bend and lift. Sweat beaded beneath his shirt despite the chill. For years now, work had been his only constant. Build, repair, sand, repeat. It kept his hands busy, kept his mind from wandering too far into places where memory still hurt. His phone buzzed against the tailgate of his truck. At first he ignored it. People didn't call him much anymore. The folks in town knew he wasn't one for chatter. But the buzz came again, insistent, followed by a ping of a message. Nathan straightened with a grunt, wiping sawdust on his jeans before picking it up. The message was from Travis, the farmer down the road. "Have you seen this?" The words were followed by a photo that made Nathan's heart slam against his ribs. He blinked hard, as if his eyes had betrayed him. But no, the image stayed the same. A German shepherd, massive, scarred, sprawled on a stretcher with his fur matted by mud and blood. His eyes half closed, yet even in stillness they carried the sharp, amber light Nathan had seen before. The ghost dog. For months, maybe longer, Nathan had caught glimpses of him at the edge of the woods behind his cabin. Always in the twilight, always silent. A shadow slipping between the trees, watching, but never approaching. Once, when the snow fell heavy, Nathan had left scraps of venison out by the shed. By morning they were gone, paw prints pressed into the white, leading back into the forest. He'd started calling him the ghost in his head. The way the animal appeared and disappeared like a spirit, never making a sound, never leaving more than a trace. Folks in town had dismissed his sightings as imagination or rumor. "Probably a stray," they'd say. Or, "You sure it ain't a coyote mix?" But Nathan knew better. Those eyes had followed him too many nights. There was intelligence there, and loneliness so raw it stung to look at. And now, here on the cracked screen of his phone, those same eyes stared back at him. Not from the tree line this time, but from a picture taken in the chaos of flashing lights and fog. Beneath the shepherd's collapsed body lay a girl, no older than 6, alive only because of him. Nathan's mouth went dry. His hand tightened on the phone until his knuckles bleached white. He whispered into the empty yard, the words catching on his throat. "It's you." He sat heavily on the tailgate, the plank of oak he'd been carrying sliding from his hands and thudding into the dirt. His back ached, but he didn't notice. He kept staring at the photo, zooming in until the scar above the dog's right eye filled the screen. He remembered that scar. He'd seen it gleam once in the last light of dusk, a pale slash that made the animal look half wraith, half warrior. The messages kept coming. Neighbors, friends from town, even Miguel Torres, a police officer he hadn't spoken to in months. The dog saved a girl. Miracle on Ashwood Trail. They're calling him a hero. Nathan's thumb hovered over the keyboard, but he didn't reply. His chest felt too tight. A storm of images flooded him. The lonely figure in the snow, the soundless steps by the tree line, the way sometimes he'd look out from his workshop window and feel eyes on him, steady and unblinking. He had thought the dog was surviving on instinct. Now he wondered if it had been something else entirely. The screen blurred as moisture stung his eyes. He scrubbed a hand across his face, ashamed at how easily the emotion caught him. He hadn't cried in years, not since the accident that had left him alone in this cabin with nothing but wood and silence for company. But this hit differently. Maybe because he knew, in some unexplainable way, that the shepherd had been carrying a burden of his own. "Ghost," he whispered again, softer now. Then, after a pause, with a steadiness he didn't expect, "Argo." The name rose unbidden, pulled from somewhere deep, like it had been waiting for him to speak it aloud. Argo, sturdy, resolute, a name that belonged to survivors. Nathan didn't know if the dog would answer to it. He only knew that it fit, the way a story fits into the hollow it was meant to fill. The phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from Travis. They're taking him to the vet clinic on Main. Said he's bad off, but still breathing. Nathan stared at the words until they burned into his mind. His body moved before his thoughts could catch up. He slid off the tailgate, tossed the phone into his truck, and grabbed his keys. The old Dodge roared to life with a sputter, coughing exhaust into the chill air. He didn't bother with coffee, didn't grab a coat. He drove as if something larger than choice had taken hold of him. The dirt road twisted beneath his tires, the forest on either side still heavy with fog. Every bump rattled through his frame, but he didn't slow down. His jaw clenched, his grip on the wheel tight enough to ache. For years, Nathan had avoided attachments. He had built a life out of wood and silence, letting grief carve out the rest. But now the sight of that dog bleeding on a stretcher, still guarding a girl who wasn't his, it cracked something open. Something Nathan thought had long since died. By the time the first buildings of Main Street emerged through the mist, his chest was pounding, not with exertion, but with a quiet, desperate urgency. He had to see him, had to stand by that stretcher and know the ghost that had haunted his nights was real, flesh and bone, fighting for his own survival. Nathan didn't know yet that the girl's name was Mira. He didn't know the details of what had happened in the woods, or the darker truths still waiting there. But as he pulled into the gravel lot of Ashwood Veterinary Clinic, one thing was already certain. His life, like the dog's, was about to change forever. The bell over the door of Ashwood Veterinary Clinic chimed as Nathan pushed inside, its thin metallic ring cutting through the antiseptic quiet. The air smelled of iodine and wet fur, familiar to anyone who had ever stood in a place meant for healing but shadowed by pain. The waiting room was nearly empty, just a woman clutching a cat carrier in her lap and a farmer with mud-streaked boots who lifted his hat politely. Nathan barely registered them, his eyes locked on the counter where Dr. Leland, the town's only veterinarian, stood bent over a chart. "Doc," Nathan said, his voice rougher than he meant. "The shepherd. They brought him here." Dr. Leland looked up, his lined face weary but steady. He adjusted his glasses and nodded toward the back hall. "They did. He's in recovery, stitched up, sedated, but alive, for now." The words landed like both blessing and warning. Alive, for now. Nathan's boots echoed down the narrow hall, the walls close and sterile. With each step, his heart thudded harder, as though preparing for a truth he wasn't ready to carry. He reached the end of the corridor, where a door stood half open, light spilling across the tiled floor. Inside, the room was dim, except for the glow of a lamp angled over a steel table. And there he was, the shepherd, Argo. He lay on his side, stitched along his flank, bandages wrapping his shoulder where the fur had been shaved. His body rose and fell shallowly, each breath a fragile protest against the night he had endured. An IV line dripped steadily into his leg, and the rhythmic hum of a monitor pulsed in the background like a quiet heartbeat. Nathan stopped in the doorway, unable to move closer at first. It felt intrusive, standing in the presence of something both broken and unyielding. He had seen animals battered before, farm dogs caught in barbed wire, strays hit on back roads, but this was different. This dog wasn't just a casualty. He was a survivor of something darker, something Nathan could only begin to imagine. He stepped closer, the soles of his boots squeaking faintly against the tile. His throat tightened. "It's you," he whispered, almost afraid the words would disturb the fragile air. For a long moment, the shepherd didn't stir. His eyes stayed closed, his body limp. Nathan's hand twitched at his side, wanting to reach out but holding back. He leaned forward instead, lowering his voice further, as though speaking to the memory of the animal he'd glimpsed in the woods. "You remember me?" The room answered with silence, until the shepherd's ear flicked, almost imperceptibly. Slowly, one amber eye cracked open, hazy but sharp enough to find him. Nathan's breath caught. That eye held weight. Recognition. Not of a name, not of a face, but of a presence. The way ghosts recognize each other in the dark. "There you are," Nathan murmured. His hand hovered inches above the edge of the table. He didn't touch, not yet. The shepherd's gaze followed him, steady despite the heaviness in his lids. And in that moment, Nathan felt it. The same connection he had sensed from the tree line. The silent bond between two souls who knew what it meant to endure alone. Dr. Leland entered quietly behind him, pulling on gloves. "He's a fighter. Lost a lot of blood, though. If it weren't for the people who found him, he'd have never made it this far." He checked the IV line, then sighed. No microchip, no collar, no owners come forward. Nathan tore his eyes from the shepherd reluctantly. "So what happens now?" "Animal control," the vet said with a shrug. "They'll hold him a week, maybe 2. If no one claims him, he'll go to a shelter. He's not exactly an easy adoption case. Scarred, half-wild, not trained for a family. Dogs like this, sometimes they don't get another chance." The words burned in Nathan's ears. No chance. He looked back at the shepherd, at the slow rise and fall of his chest, the stitches zigzagging like crude attempts to hold him together. A dog who had fought through the night to keep a little girl alive, who had guarded her with his body until his own strength gave out, and they would call him hard to place? Disposable? Nathan's jaw tightened. That's not right. Dr. Leland gave him a tired look. "I don't make the rules, Nathan. I just patch them up." The shepherd's eye closed again, his body relaxing back into the pull of sedation. Nathan felt a hollow ache bloom in his chest, the kind he hadn't allowed himself in years. He thought of the nights he had glimpsed the dog near his cabin, silent and watchful. He thought of the scar that marked him, the same scar now stitched into the photo that had stopped Nathan's breath. And he thought of the girl, Mira, though he didn't know her name yet, alive because of him. Nathan cleared his throat. His voice was steady, but it carried a weight that surprised even him. "I'll take him." Dr. Leland blinked. "What?" "I'll foster him, however long it takes. He's not going to some shelter. Not after what he's done." The vet studied him for a long moment. "You sure? He's not exactly a house pet. He may never be. Dogs with pasts like his, they carry it with them. Sometimes it breaks them." Nathan looked back at the shepherd, at the scar, at the quiet defiance even in rest. His own reflection stared back at him, grief carved into bone, silence worn like armor. "I know," he said softly. "But some things aren't meant to be left behind fences. He deserves better." Dr. Leland finally nodded, pulling off his gloves. "All right. When he's stable enough, he's yours." Nathan exhaled, the tension leaving his shoulders. He placed his hand gently on the table's edge, close enough that if the shepherd stirred, he'd know he wasn't alone. "You're coming with me, Argo," he whispered. "We'll figure it out, together." The dog didn't open his eyes, but his ear flicked once more as if he had heard and accepted. The drive back to Nathan's cabin was quiet, save for the hum of the old Dodge and the faint rattle of tools in the back seat. He had cleared a space for the shepherd, Argo, though the name still felt tentative, like a promise half-formed. The dog was weak, his stitches fresh, but he had climbed slowly into the truck bed with the help of 2 clinic aides. Now he lay curled against a blanket Nathan had thrown down, his sides rising in uneven rhythm. Every few minutes, Nathan glanced into the rearview mirror, as though afraid the weight of him might vanish if not checked. By the time the cabin appeared at the end of the dirt road, night had fallen heavy. The trees loomed dark and close, their branches creaking with the wind. Nathan pulled into the gravel drive, killed the engine, and sat for a long moment with both hands gripping the wheel. It had been years since he'd brought another living thing into this house. The thought settled over him with both dread and a strange flicker of hope. "Come on, boy," he muttered finally, stepping out. He lifted the tailgate carefully. Argo stirred, ears twitching, and with effort rose to shaky legs. Nathan steadied him as they walked slowly to the porch. The boards creaked under their combined weight, familiar to Nathan, but foreign to the dog who paused at the threshold. His nose twitched, testing the air inside. For a moment, Nathan wondered if he'd refuse, retreat back into the night, like he had so many times before. But then Argo stepped across the line, into the house. The cabin smelled of cedar and old wood smoke. Nathan flicked on a lamp, its glow soft, casting amber across the rough-hewn walls. The fireplace sat cold and dark, but Nathan crouched to stack kindling, struck a match, and coaxed the flames to life. Soon warmth filled the room, the crackle of burning logs breaking the silence. Argo eased himself down near the hearth, lowering carefully onto the braided rug, as if every movement cost him. His head lifted, eyes fixed on the flames. They reflected in the dark of his pupils, turning them into tiny lanterns. His breathing slowed, shoulders loosening, though his body never lost the tension of one who had spent too long guarding what couldn't be let go. Nathan sank into the worn armchair opposite, the firelight painting lines across his tired face. His eyes drifted to the mantel. A photograph stood there in a wooden frame, its edges polished smooth from years of touch. His late wife, Sarah, smiled back at him from another lifetime, her hair caught by the wind, eyes alive with mischief. 10 years gone, yet the sight still caught his breath. For years, Nathan had sat alone with that photograph, letting the fire be his only companion. Tonight, though, another pair of eyes shared the flames. He looked at Argo, scar catching the light, body wrapped in shadows and stitched lines. The dog did not move, did not glance at him, but in the silent watch of those amber eyes, Nathan saw something he had not allowed himself to admit. They were both survivors of grief. "Guess it's just us now," Nathan murmured. His voice was low, almost swallowed by the crackle of the fire. He leaned back, hands heavy on the armrests. "Two old souls with too many scars." The words hung in the air. Argo shifted, not away, but closer to the fire, his ears twitching as if he'd heard. His gaze never left the flames. Nathan studied him. The scar above the eye, the way his ribs showed faintly through his fur, the weight of nights spent alone in the woods. These were marks not just of survival, but of battles fought in silence. He thought of his own scars, less visible but carved just as deep. The accident. The years of waking to an empty bed, the walls he'd built around himself like fences no one was meant to cross, and yet here they were, man and dog, drawn together by some thread neither had chosen but both seemed to need. The fire popped, sending sparks upward. Nathan stirred, rising to fetch an old quilt from the cedar chest. He folded it roughly and set it down near Argo, a makeshift bed. The shepherd sniffed once, then lowered his head onto the soft fabric. For the first time that night, his body seemed to ease into something that resembled rest. Nathan lingered, crouched beside him. He didn't reach out, didn't dare breach the fragile trust beginning to form. Instead, he whispered, almost like a vow. "You're safe here. Whatever hell you came from, it stops at these walls." Argo's eyes slid closed, his ear flicking once in acknowledgement. Nathan straightened slowly, returning to his chair. The fire warmed his legs, the photograph glowed faintly above the mantel, and the quiet of the cabin no longer felt as hollow. He stared into the flames until his own eyelids grew heavy, the rhythmic sound of Argo's breathing weaving into the crackle of wood. It had been years since Nathan had allowed himself the comfort of another presence in this house. Yet tonight, with a scarred dog asleep by the fire and the memory of Sarah watching from the mantel, the silence felt different. Not empty, not crushing, shared. And that, Nathan realized as sleep edged close, was the beginning of something he had thought lost forever. The county hospital in Ashwood was small, more accustomed to sprained ankles and stubborn coughs than mysteries carried out of the forest. Its halls smelled faintly of bleach and overbrewed coffee. The lights dimmed low to preserve a sense of calm. But there was nothing calm in room 204. Mira Allen lay tucked beneath starched white sheets, her small body swallowed by the hospital bed. Bruises marred her arms and legs, a cruel patchwork of purple and yellow against skin too pale. An IV line ran from the crook of her elbow, its steady drip the only sound that confirmed life still pulsed within her. Her chest rose and fell, shallow but even, and her eyelids fluttered now and then, as though caught in dreams she couldn't escape. She hadn't spoken a word. Not when the paramedics lifted her from beneath the German shepherd's body. Not when the doctors cleaned her wounds and checked her vitals. Not when her parents had burst through the double doors, tears streaking their faces as they rushed to her bedside. Evelyn Allen clutched her daughter's hand now, her own knuckles white with the pressure of it. "Sweetheart," she whispered, voice breaking. "It's Mommy. You're safe now. Please, say something." Anything. Her husband, Mark, stood on the other side of the bed, stiff as a pillar. His hands flexed uselessly at his sides, his jaw tight with the kind of fear men rarely admitted out loud. Every so often, he'd glance at the monitor, as if the steady blip of Mira's heart could explain the silence his daughter had chosen. But the silence was heavier than numbers could measure. Doctors had come and gone, their faces carefully composed, their words clinical but strained. No signs of internal bleeding, vitals stabilizing, trauma, both physical and, likely, psychological. Each phrase was an attempt to soothe, but none of them reached the ache in the parents' chests. "What does it mean she won't talk?" Evelyn demanded at one point, her voice trembling between hope and anger. "She can hear us. She looks at us. Why won't she say anything?" Dr. Patel, the attending physician, paused before answering. She was a gentle woman, with streaks of grey in her hair, and her eyes softened as she looked at Mira. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "when children experience something overwhelming, their minds protect them by shutting certain doors. It isn't that she won't speak. It's that, for now, she can't." Evelyn broke then, folding over the bed, pressing her forehead to her daughter's small arm. The sobs came muffled, raw. Mark placed a hand on her back, but his own face crumpled despite his effort to stay strong. Through it all, Mira's eyes stayed open, wide and distant, fixed on a point somewhere beyond the ceiling. They were not blank, not frightened, just unreachable, as though she stood on the far side of a river no one else could cross. The nurses moved around them softly, adjusting tubes, checking the chart, whispering updates. One paused at the doorway, watching the family with a heaviness that was part pity, part awe. Everyone in the building had heard the story by now, the child found in the woods, the dog that had guarded her through the night. Whispers spread through the staff like wildfire. Some called it divine intervention, others a miracle of instinct, but no one could explain the silence of the girl herself. Late in the evening, as rain tapped gently against the window, Evelyn tried again. She smoothed back Mira's tangled hair, her voice trembling with exhaustion. "Do you remember the dog, sweetheart? The big shepherd who stayed with you? He kept you safe. He made sure you came back to us." For the first time, Mira blinked and turned her gaze, slowly, deliberately, toward her mother. It was only a flicker, a single acknowledgement, but Evelyn gasped as if it were the loudest cry. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks. "You hear me," she whispered. "You really hear me." But no words followed. Dr. Patel returned with a clipboard, her expression thoughtful. "She needs time," she told the parents gently. "Patience will matter more than anything else right now. Pushing her won't help. When she's ready, she'll find her voice." Mark nodded stiffly, though the furrow in his brow deepened. Evelyn kissed her daughter's forehead, whispering prayers between sobs. The hours stretched long. The rain eased, leaving the world washed clean, but heavy with damp. Shadows pooled in the corners of the room, the fire exit sign humming faintly. Mira's hand never left the ribbon clutched in her palm. The nurses had tried to loosen her grip, to place it on the side table, but her fingers refused to part from it. That scrap of pink cloth had become her anchor, the thread tying her to whatever truth she carried from the forest. And still she said nothing. In the waiting room, people whispered about her. A nurse told a janitor how the dog had snarled at everyone who tried to touch her, until he finally collapsed. An orderly shook his head, muttering that it didn't make sense. Why would a stray risk everything for a child he didn't know? The questions spiraled, echoing through the hospital walls. But inside room 204, there was only the steady rhythm of machines and the quiet, unbearable silence of a girl who could not yet speak. Mark sat back finally, exhaustion written into every line of his face. His hand covered Evelyn's, grounding her as she wept. Together they held on, their eyes fixed on their daughter's fragile frame, and Mira, with her ribbon clenched tight and her voice lost to shadows, lay still beneath the thin hospital sheets, alive but unreachable. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the hospital windows streaked with silver trails, as though the night itself had been crying. Inside room 204, the world felt suspended between two truths: a child who had survived, and a silence that refused to break. Evelyn Allen sat in a chair pulled close to the bed, her eyes heavy with sleeplessness. Mark stood near the window, hands shoved into his pockets, shoulders rigid. They spoke in whispers when they spoke at all, as if raising their voices might shatter the fragile glass that seemed to hold their daughter's world together. Mira lay quiet, her ribbon still clutched tightly in her palm. Her eyes drifted from the ceiling to the rain-streaked window, then to the door, always watching, always silent. She had not uttered a sound since being found, but that morning something different stirred. She reached her free hand toward the tray at her bedside and tapped gently against it, her finger insistent. Evelyn leaned forward, hope sparking. "What is it, sweetheart?" Mira tapped again, then pointed, first at the tray, then toward the nurse's station beyond the open door. Her lips moved faintly, shaping a word too soft to hear. Evelyn frowned, following her daughter's gesture. "You want something?" Mira nodded, small but deliberate. Her lips moved again, and this time Evelyn caught the whisper, thin as breath. "Paper." The word was so soft, so breakable, that Evelyn's heart clenched. She turned instantly to the hallway, calling out with sudden urgency, "Nurse, please, paper, crayons, if you have them." A young nurse hurried in, eyes wide at the request, but within minutes returned with a stack of blank paper and a small box of crayons pulled from the pediatric ward. She set them gently on the tray, glancing at Evelyn with a flicker of hope before stepping out again. Mira sat up slowly, weak from days of stillness, her hair falling across her bruised cheek. Her small hand trembled as she chose a crayon, black first. She pressed it to the page, dragging harsh, uneven lines across the surface. The sound of wax against paper was loud in the silence. Each stroke weighted with something far older than 6 years should have carried. Mark moved closer, unease creeping into his features. Evelyn reached instinctively for her husband's hand, squeezing as if to anchor them both. Mira drew trees, thick trunks rising like prison bars, their branches jagged and sharp. The forest filled the page, shadows crammed into every inch. Then she reached for a dark green, scribbling beneath the trunks, layering until the ground looked suffocated. Her hand paused, hovering above the box. Then she chose the black again. In the middle of the trees, she drew a figure, tall, looming, faceless. Where the head should have been, she scribbled violent black circles, again and again, until the paper tore slightly under the pressure. The figure towered, heavy strokes pressing fear into the page itself. Evelyn's breath caught. Oh, God. Mira's hand didn't stop. She grabbed the red crayon, jagged lines slashing across the black figure's arms, chest, legs. Not wounds, more like warnings. Like the very presence of the figure bled danger. Mark took an unsteady step forward. Mira, what are you? She ignored him. Her hand darted for the brown crayon, then the gray. And there, at the bottom of the page, she drew a shape curled low, wide, powerful. A dog. Argo. He stood between the faceless figure and a smaller outline she sketched behind him. A child's body drawn with hesitant lines, hair scribbled in yellow. Herself. Evelyn pressed her fist to her mouth, tears rising fast. Mira switched to black again, her strokes sharp, fast, almost frantic. She filled Argo's mouth with jagged lines, teeth bared, a growl frozen forever on paper. She pressed so hard the crayon snapped in her fingers. Without pause, she grabbed the other half and kept going, as though the image demanded completion. By the time she stopped, her chest was heaving. The page trembled in her hands, heavy with shadows and violence. She set the crayon down, fingers smudged with wax, and stared at her work. Evelyn reached out carefully, her voice barely steady. Mira, what is this? For the first time since she'd been found, Mira looked directly at her mother. Her lips parted, and her voice came in a whisper, hoarse with disuse. He growled so loud, she said, her eyes fixed on the paper. The man ran. The words fell like stones into the silence. Mark froze, breath stuck in his throat. Evelyn sobbed once, softly, pressing a hand over her daughter's trembling fingers. The room seemed to shrink around them, the weight of what had been revealed settling over every corner. Nurses appeared at the door, alerted by Evelyn's cry, their faces pale as they glanced at the drawing. Dr. Patel arrived moments later, her expression grave. She studied the page, the forest, the faceless figure, the bared teeth of the dog, and then looked at the child who had finally broken her silence. This isn't just memory, she said quietly, to no one in particular. This is evidence. Mira clutched the drawing to her chest, as if afraid it might be taken from her. Her small body shook. But she did not cry. She only stared at the door, as though expecting the faceless figure to appear at any moment. Evelyn gathered her into her arms, rocking gently, whispering promises of safety. Mark stood rooted, fists clenched, fury and terror warring across his face. And on the nightstand, the broken half of the black crayon lay smeared with wax, its sharp edge a reminder that some truths could only be spoken in lines and shadows. The mystery of what had happened in the woods deepened. But one truth was undeniable. Mira had not been lost. She had been hunted, and only a scarred dog named Argo had stood between her and the darkness. The paper shook in Mira's hands, edges crumpling under her small fingers. The drawing was a storm, trees like prison bars, a faceless man swallowed in black, and the shepherd crouched before her, teeth sharp and bared in defiance. Crayon marks smudged her skin, black streaks across her knuckles like ink that refused to wash away. Her mother's arms closed gently around her, but Mira's eyes stayed locked on the page. Her lips moved, the words caught in her throat. For a breath, it seemed they would vanish before they could escape. And then, hoarse and thin, her voice broke the silence. "He growled loud," she whispered. "The man ran." The hospital room froze. The hum of the monitor, the soft shuffle of shoes in the hallway, even Evelyn's sobs, all of it seemed to vanish, replaced by the echo of those 6 words. Mark stared at his daughter, disbelief etched across his face. His jaw clenched, his hand gripping the back of the chair so tightly the wood groaned. Evelyn gasped, tears spilling anew. "Oh, baby," she murmured, rocking her daughter tighter, though Mira did not look away from the drawing. The nurses at the doorway exchanged quick, stunned glances. One slipped out, her sneakers squeaking faintly, to alert the attending physician. Within moments, Dr. Patel appeared, her eyes sharp, her expression sober. She crouched near Mira, her voice calm but urgent. "Mira," she said softly, "can you tell me again? What happened?" But the girl didn't repeat it. She only pressed the paper to her chest, as though the truth was safer there than in the air. Dr. Patel stood, her gaze turning toward Mark and Evelyn. "This isn't a lost child case," she said quietly. "Not anymore. This was an attempt. Someone was out there with her." Mark's face darkened. His voice cracked with restrained fury. "You're saying someone tried to take her?" The doctor didn't answer directly. She didn't need to. The silence carried the weight of it. Moments later, the sheriff himself arrived. Thomas Keating, broad-shouldered, his uniform damp from the drizzle outside. He removed his hat as he stepped into the room, his presence filling it with a quiet authority. His eyes scanned the drawing first, then the girl holding it, then her parents. "She spoke?" he asked, voice low. Evelyn nodded, brushing hair from Mira's face with trembling fingers. "She said the dog. He growled. The man ran." Keating exhaled through his nose, slow and deliberate. He crouched near the bed, careful to lower himself to the child's level. "Mira," he said, his tone gentler than his rugged frame suggested. "You don't have to say anything else right now. But you helped us more than you know. You were very brave." Mira blinked once, her gaze steady but silent. The sheriff rose, tucking the brim of his hat against his chest. "We'll treat this as what it is," he said. "An attempted abduction. We'll find him." The words sent a ripple through the room. Evelyn sagged against the bed, sobs breaking free again. Mark's jaw worked, rage simmering under his skin. He turned to the sheriff. "Do whatever it takes. I don't care how many men you need to send into those woods." Keating gave a single nod. "We will." The nurses began murmuring in the hallway, their voices carrying the story like wildfire through the hospital. By the time Keating left the room, deputies were already gathering, radios crackling with orders. What had been a story of a lost child found was shifting into something darker, heavier. Inside the room, Evelyn stroked her daughter's hair, whispering comfort. Mark pulled the chair closer, his large hand wrapping around Mira's small wrist, careful but firm. "You're safe," he said, though his voice broke on the last word. "I promise you, you're safe." But the truth hung unspoken. Safety had been stolen from her once. Only a scarred shepherd had given it back. On the nightstand, the broken black crayon still lay, wax ground into the wood. The drawing lay pressed against Mira's chest, its jagged lines a testimony more powerful than any report. The girl had spoken, and with her words, the silence shattered. Now the hunt would begin. Nathan's cabin had always been a quiet place. Thick pine walls muffled the wind, heavy curtains softened the dark, and the old clock ticked steadily above the mantel. It was the silence he'd built to survive grief. Each night had been the same. Low fire, Sarah's photograph watching from the mantel, and sleep in solitude. But with Argo there, the silence was no longer comforting. The shepherd carried himself like a soldier, dropped into hostile ground. By day, he stretched in the sun, ate sparingly, and rested near the hearth. But by night, his body shifted, muscles tense, ears twitching, amber eyes locked on the windows, as though only he could hear the whispers in the trees. The first week, Nathan woke to a growl, low and vibrating through the floorboards. Argo stood rigid at the front window, paws braced against the sill, hackles raised. Nathan squinted into the fog-laden tree line. Nothing stirred, but he trusted the dog's instincts. "Easy, boy," he whispered, hand brushing bristled fur. The shepherd didn't relax. His breath fogged the glass, growling. Nathan felt unease settle in his bones. Sleep came fitful, broken by each creak of timber, each gust of wind. He wondered what ghosts haunted Argo when his eyes closed. The next evening mirrored the first. After stew and silence, Nathan read by the fire, while Argo stretched on the rug. But near midnight, the shepherd rose sharply, head snapping toward the back door. A guttural growl filled the cabin, older than language. Nathan froze, then followed him. Moonlight drew thin silver lines through the glass. Somewhere in the dark, branches snapped. His breath caught. Argo's eyes locked east, unblinking. Nathan's chest tightened. He reached for the rifle by the mantel. A man and a dog stood at the window, staring into blackness. Minutes bled past. Then the growl faded. The shepherd sank onto his haunches, eyes still fixed outside. "You're telling me something," Nathan murmured. "I just don't know what yet." The words felt like truth. By the third night, Nathan could no longer sit idle. When Argo stiffened again, he pulled on his boots and grabbed the flashlight. "All right, boy," he muttered. "Let's see." Argo bolted into the night, nose lifted to the wind. Nathan caught a faint tang of smoke, or maybe gasoline, before the chill swallowed it. The shepherd moved ahead in silence, paws brushing the ground like a shadow. The forest grew unnervingly still. No crickets, no owls, as though the woods themselves were holding their breath. Half a mile in, Argo stopped. His body stiffened. He stepped toward a clearing Nathan hadn't entered in years. The flashlight revealed churned dirt, broken branches, and the faint stench of rot. Near a mossy stump lay a frayed shoelace, child-sized. Nathan's throat closed. Mira, the silent girl at the hospital. Argo pawed at the ground, urging him to see more. Nathan swept the beam across the trunk. Gouges clawed deep into bark, desperate marks, small hands scraping for escape. His stomach turned. "You found this," he whispered. "This is where you pulled her from." The shepherd's eyes gleamed in the light, unyielding. Nathan shoved the shoelace into his pocket. His hand trembled as he pulled out his phone. The sheriff's number stared back at him. Argo barked once, sharp and commanding. Nathan pressed the call. "Keating," he said when the sheriff answered. "You need to come to my property. Bring men. We've got something you need to see." By the time Sheriff Keating and his deputies arrived, fog had settled low, turning every tree into a sentinel. Their boots sank into damp soil, radios hushed by the weight of the place. Nathan led them to the stump and placed the shoelace in Keating's hand. The sheriff's jaw hardened. "Spread out. Mark everything." Evidence emerged quickly. A length of frayed rope, a strip of duct tape dulled with dirt, cigarette butts pressed into the ground. "This wasn't a chance," Nathan muttered. "No," Keating said grimly. "This was preparation." Then came the shallow pit, a blanket molding under pine needles, the charred ring of an old fire, a cheap lighter. Keating crouched. "This wasn't one night. Someone's been here, watching." Nathan's stomach twisted. Mira's crayon drawing returned to him, black scribbles of a faceless figure in the trees. A deputy lifted a scrap of fabric stained dark. "Blood, fresh enough to test." The sheriff rose. "Bag everything. This isn't an abandoned camp. It's a hunting ground." The words cut through the fog like a blade. Argo whined low, circling the pit. He pressed his paw against the blanket, then looked back at Nathan with eyes that spoke clearer than language. "Don't forget what happened here." Keating studied the shepherd. "Then he may be the best witness we've got." Evidence bags snapped. Cameras flashed. Markers pierced soil. But unease lingered. These weren't just objects. They were fragments of intent. The habits of a predator who had carved out space in their woods, who had planned, waited, nearly succeeded. Nathan's fingers brushed the tree's claw marks. His throat tightened at the thought of Mira's small hands tearing bark. "This isn't over, is it?" he asked. The sheriff shook his head. "Men like this don't quit. They circle back. And when they do, we'll be ready." Nathan looked down at Argo. The shepherd stood taut, ears pricked toward the trees. His body bore scars, but his eyes burned with something unbroken. Nathan understood then. Argo wasn't just guarding Mira that night. He was guarding her still, through every shadow, every whisper in the woods. And if the predator returned, Argo would be waiting. The hospital was quiet, corridors hushed by the shuffle of nurses' shoes and the hum of machines. Room 204 sat in that silence like a fragile bubble. Mira lay beneath a thin blanket, her ribbon clutched tight in her fist. Evelyn dozed against the mattress, fingers tangled in her daughter's hair. Mark sat rigid in the chair, eyes closed, but body tense. For the first time since the rescue, peace seemed possible. Then Mira whimpered. Her small body twitched, breath shallow and quick. Suddenly she screamed, piercing, raw. "The smell of smoke! Gasoline!" Evelyn shot upright, gathering her daughter against her chest. Mark's chair clattered backward as he rushed forward. Mira thrashed wildly, her thin arms flailing as if still trapped in the woods. "He's here! He's here!" "No, sweetheart," Evelyn cried, tears streaking her face. "You're safe. Mommy's here. Daddy's here." But Mira buried her face against her mother, sobbing. "Gasoline! He smelled like gasoline!" The words froze Mark. Nightmares didn't carry detail. Nightmares didn't smell. The door burst open. Nurses spilled in, Dr. Patel at their heels. What happened? She woke up screaming. Evelyn gasped. She said, "Smoke. Gasoline." Dr. Patel's voice stayed calm, though her eyes sharpened. She crouched near the bed. "Mira, you're safe. This is the hospital. No one can hurt you here." The child clung to her ribbon, trembling. Mark pressed his fists to the rail, pacing once before muttering under his breath, "Gasoline. Why would she remember that?" And then, another sound. A bark. Not in the hallway, not in the ward. It came through Evelyn's phone, still on speaker from an earlier call to Nathan Cole. The shepherd's voice cut sharp through static. One bark, then another, followed by a low growl. Mira froze. Slowly, she lifted her head, eyes wide. "Argo." Her whisper cracked the room open. Evelyn sobbed harder, kissing her daughter's hair. Mark turned away, fighting tears. Even Dr. Patel allowed the smallest smile. On the phone, Nathan's voice was weary but steady. "He knows. He's been restless all night." Mira pressed her cheek to the phone, whispering, "He kept me safe." The words broke Evelyn. She rocked her daughter, whispering prayers. Mark stood rigid, jaw trembling. From the doorway, Sheriff Keating watched, hat in hand. His voice carried a quiet weight. "This isn't just trauma. It's a memory. Whoever that man was, he reeked of gasoline. That's no dream." The room fell still. But Mira, clutching the phone, whispered once more before exhaustion pulled her under. "The dog will keep me safe." And in a cabin miles away, Argo stood at the window, hackles raised, growling into the woods, as if answering her vow. The next morning, sunlight slanted into the small therapy room at Ashwood Hospital. Its soft blue walls and toys in the corner were meant to coax children into speaking. Mira sat by the window instead, ribbon clenched, gaze fixed on the glass. Across from her, Dr. Amelia Rowe waited patiently. Paper and crayons lay untouched on the table between them. Evelyn and Mark watched through the observation window, their hope and fear pressed into silence. "Mira," Dr. Rowe said gently, "you don't have to rush. But sometimes small details are doors. They open bigger ones." Mira twisted the ribbon until her knuckles whitened. Long moments passed before she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "Blue." Dr. Rowe leaned closer. "Blue?" "A blue cap." Evelyn gasped behind the glass, her hand flying to her mouth. Mark's fists clenched. Dr. Rowe kept her tone calm. "That's very brave. Can you tell me more?" Mira's eyes flicked toward the crayons, but she didn't move. Her whisper cracked again, trembling. "He smelled like gas." Her body shuddered. She curled in on herself, ribbon shaking in her grip. Dr. Rowe's voice softened further. "That's enough. You're safe here, Mira. No one can hurt you anymore." But the detail lingered, heavy as stone. Evelyn's tears spilled freely. Mark stood rigid, fury carved into his jaw. The door opened quietly. Sheriff Keating stepped in, his gaze steady. He had heard enough. Blue cap, gasoline, not a dream. Memory. When the session ended, Evelyn rushed to Mira, whispering, "You're so brave." Mark stroked her hair with trembling hands. For the first time since the nightmare, Mira looked lighter, as though speaking had eased her burden. In the hallway, Keating turned to Nathan, who had come with Argo. The shepherd sat taut, ears twitching, nose lifted as if catching the scent of truth. "She said blue cap," Keating murmured. Nathan's voice was low. "Does that mean something to you?" The sheriff exhaled. "There's a drifter we've had trouble with, Ray Dwyer, always wearing the same torn blue cap, always stinking of gas." Nathan's stomach sank. Argo growled faintly, nose pressed to the floor as though he too had caught the memory. "It's more than coincidence," Keating said grimly. "Ray drifts from town to town, never long enough to pin, always long enough to leave scars. Now we've got a child's words tying him to the woods." Evelyn emerged with Mira clutched close. Mark's voice shook with anger. "If that man came near my daughter, I want him to be found. I want him gone." Keating placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "We'll find him, but predators like Ray, they linger. They circle back." Argo's body stiffened, eyes fixed down the hall. His growl rumbled like distant thunder. Nathan crouched, resting a hand on the dog's scarred head. "You heard her too, didn't you? Blue cap. Gasoline." The shepherd's answer was another low growl. That evening, in the sheriff's office, a single lamp lit the desk. The smell of coffee and paper hung heavy in the air. Keating spread a thin folder open. Evelyn and Mark sat across, pale and worn. Nathan leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Argo braced beside him like a soldier at post. Keating tapped the file. Ray Dwyer. The name landed like a stone. Evelyn flinched. Mark's jaw clenched. The sheriff slid a photo forward, a mugshot. Hollow eyes, unshaven jaw. A sneer caught mid-expression. "History of trespassing," Keating said. "Bar fights, threats, resisting arrest. Never enough to hold him long. Last month he was caught siphoning gas behind the store. Threatened to burn it down. Deputies ran him off, but he vanished before charges stuck." Evelyn whispered, "Gasoline." Mark slammed his fist against the desk. "If you'd locked him up, the law isn't a cage," Keating cut in. "Not without the right keys. Men like Ray slip through cracks. They live off fear, disappear before anyone pins them down." Nathan studied the photo. The man's eyes radiated something hollow, dangerous. Beside him, Argo's ears flattened. A growl vibrated deep in his chest. Keating's voice hardened, but this time's different. He stayed, set up camp in those woods, watched, waited, and he almost succeeded. Argo's growl deepened, echoing off the walls. Everyone froze. The shepherd's eyes locked on the photo, teeth bared just enough to glint in the lamplight. Nathan crouched, his hand steady on the dog's shoulder. "Easy, boy. We hear you." The sheriff closed the file with finality. "I'll have deputies sweep the town. Check motels, back roads, anyone who's seen him. But hear me now. Men like Ray don't just run. They circle back. Predators don't like to lose." Evelyn clutched Mira's ribbon in her hand. Mark's fists clenched. Nathan straightened, his voice low, certain. "Then we prepare." Keating nodded once. "We prepare." As the meeting broke, Evelyn and Mark walked down the dim hall, their shoulders bent under fear. Keating tucked the file under his arm, already planning the manhunt. Nathan lingered at the door. Argo pressed close to his leg, growl still simmering. Nathan could feel the storm building, the silence before thunder, the tension before lightning strikes. He looked down at the shepherd, scarred but unbroken, eyes burning with the knowledge of things men tried to deny. "You know it too," Nathan whispered. "This isn't over. It's just beginning." Argo huffed once, sharp and certain. The vow was sealed, and Nathan understood with chilling clarity. The storm was already here. The hospital no longer felt like a place of healing. Deputies lingered in hallways, radios clipped to their belts, the air tinged with leather, steel, and the faint tang of gun oil. The hum of machines remained, but layered now with authority and unease. Sheriff Keating walked with measured gravity, his jaw set. He hated the plan. Asking a 6-year-old to carry what trained investigators couldn't was wrong. But Mira's whispers were the only thread they had. Every day without action was another chance for Ray Dwyer to vanish into the pines. Nathan strode beside him, Carpenter's frame worn but steady, Argo pacing close at his heel. The shepherd's nails clicked against linoleum, ears pricked, body taut. Even here, in antiseptic light, the dog carried the forest in his stance, watchful, unyielding. At the end of a cleared corridor, Evelyn crouched beside Mira, smoothing the ribbon in her daughter's hand. Mira's eyes darted nervously between the adults, wide but alert. Keating spoke low to Nathan. "She trusts you. Stay close. If she falters, you step in. We don't push her." Nathan nodded, crouching to Mira's level. "You're not alone," he murmured. "Argo's with you. I'll be right here." The shepherd sat tall, Scar catching the light, amber eyes fixed steady. Mira reached out, pressing her small hand into his fur. No words came, but none were needed. Minutes later, the stage was set. Nurses pushed carts, clipboards in hand, their movements casual. Deputies in plain shirts mingled with them, their eyes sharp despite practiced indifference. And among them moved the decoy, a man in a faded blue cap, jacket scuffed with use. Mira sat on the bench, her legs swinging, Argo pressed tight to her side. Nathan stood a few feet away, arms crossed, tension coiled through his body. Keating waited at the far end of the hall, his deputies ready, but restrained. The first few passers-by earned nothing. Mira glanced, then dropped her gaze. Argo sniffed once, but stayed calm. The corridor hummed with ordinary life. Then the man in the cap turned the corner. Mira stiffened instantly. Her ribbon crumpled in her fist, knuckles white. Breath hitched sharp in her throat. Her eyes locked on the figure. At the same heartbeat, Argo's head snapped up. His body stiffened, ears flat, a growl rolling low and primal from his chest. Nathan felt the shift ripple through the air. He stepped closer, voice steady though taut. "It's all right, sweetheart. You're safe. He can't touch you." But Mira's lips trembled. Her whisper barely carried, yet it struck like thunder. "It's him." The shepherd's growl deepened, his eyes fixed on the man with unblinking certainty. The stranger's stride faltered, his head turned just slightly, eyes flicking toward the girl, then the dog. For the briefest flicker, recognition crossed his face, then calculation. Mira pressed against Argo, whispering again, stronger now. He smelled like gas. Argo barked, sharp and explosive, the sound echoing down the corridor like a gunshot. The hallway froze. Nurses halted mid-step, a clipboard clattered to the floor. Deputies tensed, hands hovering near concealed holsters. Keating's eyes narrowed, giving the faintest shake of his head. Hold. Let the truth settle. But Ray Dwyer moved first. His shoulders tightened, eyes darting to the exit. Then he bolted. He shoved past a nurse, scattering papers like startled birds. A cart toppled against the wall, bottles smashing, antiseptic misting the air. Chaos erupted. "Go!" Keating's roar cut through the din. Deputies lunged forward, radios crackling. "Suspect fleeing! East exit!" Argo erupted, barks deafening in the narrow hall. He lunged forward, Nathan straining to hold him back. Mira clung to the shepherd's fur, shrieking as the dog's muscles surged beneath her hands. Ray barreled toward the double doors, shoving a tray of instruments aside. The crash rang sharp as he hit the doors hard, bursting into the cold evening. Deputies poured after him, boots pounding linoleum, then asphalt. One dove for his legs. Ray twisted, boots slamming into the deputy's ribs. Another lunged, fingers grazing his cap, before Ray slammed a shoulder into his chest, sending him sprawling. Keating was right behind, barking into his radio. "Seal the perimeter. Roadblocks at River and Mill. He's heading north, toward the tree line." But Ray was already there. Flashlight beams caught him once. Cap, jacket, sweat glinting on his face, before the woods swallowed him whole. Argo howled, raw and thunderous, a sound that silenced even the chaos for a heartbeat. His body quaked, teeth bared, every fiber straining to follow. Nathan crouched low, Mira clutched to his chest. Her sobs broke against his shoulder. "Don't let him take me." "You're safe," Nathan whispered, though his voice shook with the weight of doubt. "He's gone. He can't get to you." The words tasted hollow. Keating stormed back through the doors, breath harsh, jaw set. "He's in the woods. We'll flood every trail, but he knows the ground. He's desperate, and that makes him dangerous." Deputies sprinted past, sirens swelling outside, radios blaring updates. "Unit 3 South Trail. Unit 6 Highway Underpass." Evelyn and Mark rushed down the corridor, terror etched across their faces. Evelyn dropped to her knees beside Mira, crushing her daughter in frantic arms. Mark stood rigid, fists trembling, eyes burning toward the exit. "Why didn't you stop him?" he snapped, voice breaking. Keating didn't flinch. "Because your daughter's safety came first. We don't start shooting in a hospital corridor." Mark sagged, fury folding into helplessness. Evelyn kissed Mira's hair, rocking her gently as her sobs eased. Nathan rose slowly, one hand on Argo's tense shoulders. The shepherd hadn't taken his eyes off the door. His chest heaved, body thrumming with unfinished business. Nathan rubbed the scar at his neck, voice low, meant for both dog and self. "We'll get him. This isn't over." The truth of it hung heavier than promise. Outside, the Ashwood woods stretched vast, tangled, unyielding. Somewhere in that darkness, Ray Dwyer ran, with nothing to lose, and every reason to return. The hospital's order returned in fragments, nurses gathering papers, deputies taping off the corridor. But beneath it all lingered the certainty. He was still out there, free, watching, waiting. Keating's voice was gravel when he turned back. "This changes everything. He knows we're onto him. He won't stop running. He won't stop circling. And he sure as hell won't stop coming back." Nathan glanced at Argo. The shepherd's amber eyes burned toward the tree line miles away, body still taut with the memory of pursuit. And Nathan knew, as clearly as the dog already did, the hunt had only just begun. Nathan Cole's cabin had once been a refuge. Its log walls had held years of silence, firelight, and solitude. But since Mira's rescue and Ray Dwyer's escape, the silence no longer soothed. It stalked me. Evelyn and Mark insisted Mira stay here for a while, away from town swarming with deputies and reporters. They believed the woods would shield her. Nathan knew better. Safety was an illusion, and Argo knew it too. The first night, Mira slept fitfully in the guest room, ribbon clutched tight in her fist. Evelyn lay beside her, whispering lullabies through her own broken voice. Mark sprawled uncomfortably on the couch, one arm draped near the rifle Nathan had left within reach. Nathan sat by the fire, staring at the windows where fog pressed thick against the glass. And Argo never slept. The shepherd lay stretched across the threshold, ears pricked, eyes burning into the tree line. Every sound, an owl, a shuffle of branches, the faint snap of something moving, was marked. His chest rumbled with low growls, vibrations that seemed older than language. When Mira whimpered in her sleep, "Blue cap, smell of gas," the words clung to the cabin like smoke. Nathan closed his eyes, pain twisting through his chest. He wanted to believe Ray had fled far from Ashwood, but every whisper, every growl told him otherwise. Mark stirred restlessly, muttering from the couch. "Dog hasn't blinked in hours." "He won't until it's over," Nathan answered. Mark's gaze softened on the shepherd. "Then maybe none of us should." The hours crawled toward dawn. Mira murmured. Evelyn startled at every sound. Mark paced to the window. Nathan kept his post by the fire. Argo kept his at the door. Outside, the woods breathed secrets. The faint scent of smoke drifted on the wind. Once, a twig snapped sharp in the fog, and Argo's growl rose again. Nathan gripped the rifle. The night gave nothing back but silence and waiting. By morning, exhaustion weighed heavy. Mira clung to her ribbon while Evelyn brushed her tangled hair. Mark brewed coffee sharp enough to sting the air. Nathan stacked logs with aching arms, and Argo stood at the window still, eyes locked on the trees, as if carved from loyalty and memory. "We'll be ready," Nathan whispered, but readiness felt like a lie. Predators circled. They didn't leave. The second night was worse. Exhaustion carved lines into every face. Evelyn's hands trembled when she tucked Mira in. Mark's eyes were dark hollows from sleeplessness. Nathan's body ached with the weight of vigilance. But Argo was tireless. He stood sentinel by the door, muscles taut, gaze unblinking toward the woods drowned in fog. Near midnight, Nathan saw it. At first a flicker, then a glint. Two bright circles reflecting moonlight from deep within the trees. Eyes, but not of an animal. Binoculars. Nathan's stomach dropped. His pulse hammered. "Damn it," he breathed. Argo's growl rolled like thunder. He had seen, or sensed it too. Nathan pulled on his boots, grabbed the flashlight, and slipped into the cold night with Argo at his side. Fog hugged the ground, magnifying every crunch of his boots. The shepherd padded ahead, silent, nose twitching. 30 yards into the woods, they found proof. Boot prints pressed into damp soil, angled toward the cabin. Fresh, edges sharp. At the base of a tree, cigarette ash scattered. Nathan touched it. The grains were still warm. "He was right here," he muttered, bile rising. "Watching us." Argo circled the tree, hackles high, teeth bared at the emptiness. He froze, nose lifted, body quivering with focus. For a moment, Nathan thought he would tear into the woods after the ghost. Instead, the dog sank to his haunches, growling steady. The message was clear. The intruder was gone, but not far. Nathan's chest ached with fury. He swept his flashlight across the fog, seeing nothing but shadows. The man in the blue cap was out there, close enough to watch through glass. "Come on, boy. We've seen enough." Back inside, he bolted the door tight. Evelyn stirred, whispering, "What happened?" Nathan's voice was grim. Someone was out there, watching. Her face drained. "Are you sure?" Boot prints. Ash is still warm. Mark rose, fists clenched. Then we stay awake, all of us. Let him circle. We'll be ready. But readiness felt hollow. Nathan looked at Argo, who returned to his post at the door, eyes blazing into the tree line, a growl still vibrating low. The predator wasn't gone. He was closer than ever. By morning, the cabin was no longer Nathan's. Deputies swarmed the yard, boots heavy on frost-tipped grass. Coils of cable lay across the porch, cameras strapped to tree trunks, sensors blinking red. Nathan's quiet sanctuary had become an outpost. Sheriff Keating oversaw it all, his broad frame planted on the porch, thermos in hand. His voice carried steady authority as he pointed out sightlines and blind spots. Nathan stood at the steps, jaw tight, watching strangers wire his land. The woods had once been an ally, sanctuary. Now, they betrayed him. Argo paced near the tree line, hackles rising whenever the wind carried the faint tang of gasoline. He hadn't slept. He wouldn't. Keating finally turned toward Nathan, climbing the steps. His voice was low, edged with steel. "You know why we're doing this?" Nathan nodded. "Because he was here." "Closer than you think," Keating said. "Binoculars on your window. Cigarettes are still warm. That wasn't a chance." That was the intent. Nathan's chest tightened at the image of Ray's eyes pressed against glass, watching Mira clutch her ribbon in sleep. The sheriff's gaze hardened. Predators like him don't run. They circle. Push them off once. They test your walls. Push them off twice. They test your resolve. They keep coming until either you stop them or they take what they came for. Nathan wanted to deny it. But he'd seen the claw marks on bark, the shoelace tangled in roots, Mira's broken whispers. And he saw it now, in Argo's relentless watch. "So, what do we do?" he asked quietly. Keating gestured toward the blinking sensors. "We set the trap, give him the chance he's waiting for, and when he takes it, we finish it." Nathan exhaled. "Using us as bait." "Using his obsession against him," Keating corrected. "He wants the girl. He knows she's here. He won't stop until he tries again. Better we're ready than blind." Silence stretched. Nathan stared into the trees, shadows thick even as fog lifted. He'd lived alone long enough to know predators weren't driven by hunger alone. They were driven by compulsion. He looked at Argo, who sat at the porch edge, scarred face taut, ears sharp, body humming with vigilance. Nathan rubbed his head gently, feeling the simmer of a growl beneath fur. "He knows it too," Nathan murmured. Keating nodded. "Then listen to him. If he moves, you move. That dog's instincts may save more lives than any sensor we put out here." Evelyn stepped onto the porch, Mira clinging to her side. The girl's eyes were shadowed, her ribbon clutched tight. She pressed closer into her mother's coat at the sight of wires and deputies. Nathan knelt, offering his hand. "You're safe here," he said softly, though safety was brittle. Mira hesitated, then placed her trembling hand in his. Argo rose instantly, placing himself between her and the woods. She relaxed slightly, her palm resting on his fur. Keating watched, his voice softer now. "She's stronger than she knows, but she won't have to be alone. We'll keep her safe." Nathan met his eyes, voice steady. "One way or another." The last sensor blinked red. Deputies packed their gear. The cabin stood wired and waiting. Keating's final words carried like stone. "Remember this. Predators don't run. They circle back. Nathan nodded, his gaze locked on the tree line. The fog was lifting, but shadows lingered, and deep inside, he knew. The storm wasn't gone. It was waiting. By dawn, Ashwood already knew. No one said it aloud in the diner or at the market, but glances over coffee cups carried the truth. Ray Dwyer was still out there, and the girl was still in danger. The sheriff had asked for silence, but fear traveled faster than orders. By mid-morning, the first pickup rolled into Nathan's drive. It was Harold Green, the hardware store owner, with boxes of padlocks and solar floodlights rattling in his truck bed. "Figured you'd need these more than my shelves," he said, unloading without ceremony. Next came Margaret Lewis, arms full of food, bread, soup, and pies. She pressed the basket into Evelyn's hands. "You'll eat. Strength matters." One by one, others followed. Men with tool belts, teenagers carrying lumber, a generator hauled from a barn. They came without speeches, only with the quiet resolve of people who understood that danger lived at the edge of their woods. Nathan stood on the porch, watching his solitary cabin change. Hammers rang against hinges. Steel plates braced the doors. Floodlights glared beneath the eaves. Sensors blinked red like watchful eyes. What had once been a refuge was becoming a fortress. Evelyn moved among them, Mira clinging to her side. A woman knelt to hand the girl a knitted scarf. "For when the nights are cold." Mira held it close to her ribbon, silent but less alone. Argo never left the porch. The shepherd sat at the steps, gaze locked on the tree line. His body was taut, his ears flicking at each sound. Every nail driven, every lock turned, he knew, was preparation for a night that hadn't yet come. Near noon, Sheriff Keating arrived. He looked at the floodlights, the locks, the men hammering at window frames. "Looks more like a fortress than a cabin," he said flatly. "If it keeps her safe, it can look like a castle," Nathan answered. The sheriff's eyes softened. "It's not just her anymore, Cole. He's watching all of you." By late afternoon, the work was done. The cabin bristled with locks, lights, and wires. When the last trucks rolled away, neighbors pressed Nathan's hand or Evelyn's shoulder. One whispered to Mira, "You're not alone, sweetheart." Silence returned, but it was no longer peaceful. It was charged, the silence before a storm. When night fell, the floodlights hummed to life, carving the mist into jagged silver shadows. Instead of comfort, they only deepened the darkness. Inside, the air was brittle with quiet. Evelyn sat near Mira by the fire. Mark paced by the window, his hand brushing the rifle each time he passed. Nathan sat at the table with cold coffee in his hands, telling himself he was guarding, though he knew the real sentinel was Argo. The shepherd lay across the doorway, every muscle taut. His amber eyes never closed, shifting from door to window, ears twitching at each sound outside. Mira curled against him on the rug, fingers tangled in his fur, holding him as if words might summon what she feared. Hours crawled. Midnight bled into one into two. The floodlights caught only fog, but the silence was tension stretched thin, ready to snap. Then Argo growled, low, deliberate. His body stiffened, eyes locked on the door. Mira stirred, clutching him tighter. Nathan stood, rifle in hand. Mark yanked the curtain aside, nothing but fog curling in the lights. But Argo didn't waver. His growl said what no one else could see. "You trust him?" Mark asked. "With my life," Nathan said. Minutes passed. The dog's growl softened, but never ceased. Everyone settled again, uneasily. Evelyn rocked Mira. Mark resumed pacing. Nathan sat with his rifle across his lap. Argo lay down, but his eyes never left the door. The hours before dawn were always the hardest. The fire burned to ash, the air colder. Evelyn dozed lightly with Mira in her arms. Mark sat rigid by the window. Nathan sat hunched at the table, fighting sleep. Then, a sharp beep cut through the silence. The motion detector. Its red light blinked steady. Sector 4, Northwest Perimeter. The same patch of woods where Nathan had once found boot prints. Argo rose, growling deep in his chest. Hackles bristled, teeth bared. Mark's voice was tight. "Which side?" "Northwest," Nathan said. His heart thudded. "He's back." On the radio, Sheriff Keating's voice crackled. "Cole, we've got movement. Stay inside. Deputies are closing in." But Nathan knew deputies couldn't hold obsession. Dwyer had slipped nets before. If he was here, it was because he chose to be. Mark peeked through the curtain. At first, nothing but mist. Then movement, low, deliberate, along the tree line. A wiry figure in a torn jacket, a cap pulled low. Something glinted in his hands, pipe or tire iron. "It's him," Mark hissed. Nathan saw him too. Ray Dwyer, creeping with patience sharpened by compulsion. Argo lunged, barking with such force the doorframe rattled. Mira screamed softly, clutching Evelyn. Ray froze in the fog, head tilted, listening. Even at a distance, his posture carried hunger, shoulders forward, weapon ready. "He's testing us," Nathan murmured. The radio crackled again. Keating. "Hold steady." "Don't engage unless you have to." But steady felt impossible. Inside the cabin, the air vibrated with Argo's rage, Mira's sobs, Mark's curses. Then Ray stepped forward into the wash of floodlights, his face gaunt, eyes hollow, mouth twisted into a grin. He raised the pipe, tapping it lightly against his leg, savoring the sound. Argo went wild, his body slamming against the door, teeth snapping, growl exploding into a roar. For the first time, Ray faltered. The grin slipped. His eyes narrowed at the scarred shepherd straining against the wood. Nathan steadied the dog with one hand, rifle with the other. His voice was quiet, seething. "Not tonight, Ray." Mira's whisper trembled in the cabin. "He's here to take me." Nathan's reply came like steel. "Not while Argo breathes." Outside, Ray circled, testing for weakness. Inside, every soul braced for the strike that hadn't yet come. The red light on the sensor blinked, and blinked, and blinked. The hunt had arrived at their doorstep. The hour before sunrise was the most fragile. The floodlights still glared across the clearing, but the fog was thinning into ribbons that drifted like ghosts between the trees. Inside, no one slept. Every breath carried the weight of waiting. For the next sound, the next red blink of the sensors. Then it came. Not a warning beep, not the sheriff's voice over the radio, but the scrape of boots on gravel. Nathan froze. He motioned sharply for Evelyn and Mira to stay low. Mark raised his rifle, knuckles pale. Argo was already rigid, muscles coiled like wire, ears flat against his head. Through the curtain's narrow gap, Nathan saw him. Ray Dwyer crept from the tree line, fog curling around him like a cloak, his jacket torn, face gaunt, eyes burning with feral hunger. In his grip, a pipe gleamed in the floodlight. He wasn't rushing. He was savoring, inching closer with the patience of a predator who believed his prey was cornered. Nathan's chest tightened as Ray shifted toward the side window, the very one where Mira had once slept. Thin glass, glowing faintly from the fire inside. "He's at the window," Nathan whispered. Mira buried her face in Evelyn's coat, trembling. She didn't cry, didn't scream. She only stared with wide, terrified eyes, as if seeing her nightmare made flesh. Ray raised the pipe, tilting it like a lever, testing the glass. His face pressed closer, a grin stretched too wide, jagged and certain. Argo's snarl shattered the silence. It erupted low and thunderous, not warning, but war. In a blur, the shepherd launched forward. His claws scraped wood. His body slammed the door, and the latch burst. "Argo! No!" Nathan lunged, but the dog was already gone, muscle and fury streaking into the fog. Ray flinched, his grin faltering as the scarred shepherd tore across the yard, eyes blazing, teeth bared. Deputies at the perimeter shouted, radios crackling, "Contact!" "Dogs out!" But no one moved faster than Argo. Ray raised the pipe, squaring his shoulders. For a heartbeat, predator and protector collided in silence. Then the world broke open. Steel met flesh with a sickening thud as the pipe struck Argo's shoulder. The shepherd yelped but never faltered. In the same heartbeat, his jaws clamped down on Ray's arm. The sound was primal, bone yielding beneath relentless force. Ray howled, staggering, but Argo held fast, body low, legs digging into the mud. Nathan reached the porch, rifle raised, breath hammering. Evelyn's scream cut from inside, Mira's sobs cracked like glass. Deputies surged closer, flashlights slicing arcs through the mist. But in the yard, it was only two figures, the predator and the sentinel. Ray swung wildly, pipe smashing once against Argo's ribs. The dog grunted, but his jaws only sank deeper, eyes blazing with devotion more than rage. They hit the ground, rolling hard in the mud, blood streaking Argo's muzzle. Ray clawed at the dog's neck, screaming, "Get him off me!" But no one moved. Not yet. They all knew. This was not theirs to end. Argo growled, a sound that shook Ray's bones, vibrating through every tendon. The pipe slipped from his grip, lost in the grass. His screams turned ragged, panicked, no longer the voice of a hunter, but of prey. Nathan edged closer, rifle steady, whispering through clenched teeth. "Hold him, boy. Don't let him go." The clearing became chaos, floodlights glaring, radios crackling, deputies charging through the fog. Sheriff Keating's voice cut sharp. "Move in! Get him down!" 3 men swarmed, driving Ray into the mud. Cuffs snapped on his free wrist, his legs pinned, blood smeared across the dirt, soaking his torn jacket. His screams cracked into gasps. Strength bled away, not by hands, but by teeth. Keating stepped forward, voice softer now. "All right, boy. That's enough." But Argo didn't move. His jaws stayed locked, amber eyes burning into the man who had haunted the woods. Deputies froze, unwilling to pry him off by force. Only Nathan stepped closer, crouching near the shepherd. His hand brushed the scarred head, his voice low but certain. "Argo, it's over. You did it. You kept her safe." At last, the dog's grip loosened. Blood dripped from his muzzle, his body trembling with exhaustion. He stepped back, but never took his eyes off Ray. Deputies hauled the man upright. His boots dragged deep ruts in the mud, his curses hoarse, broken. Keating shoved him toward the cruiser with finality. "You've done enough talking." Inside, Mira pressed her hand to the window, her lips moving. "He kept me safe," she whispered. Evelyn kissed her hair, tears slipping down her cheeks. Nathan heard her, saw her small hand framed in glass. His throat tightened. For all his solitude, he had never seen loyalty embodied so fiercely as in the scarred shepherd at his side. Keating lingered a moment longer, his gaze on the dog. "Get him patched up. He's earned more than any medal." Nathan stroked the trembling flank, his voice quiet. "He doesn't need a medal. He's already got what matters." Outside, deputies loaded Ray into the patrol car. His head hung low, his fight gone, his curses meaningless against the morning light. Argo stood in the mud, blood on his muzzle, scars gleaming under the pale floodlights. Exhausted but unbroken. Mira whispered once more, her voice like a prayer. "He kept me safe." The shepherd lifted his head. His growl faded. His tail gave a single, weary thump. And as dawn broke over Ashwood, painting the fog in pale gold, the predator was gone. The child was safe. And the ghost dog had become a hero. The town square of Ashwood had never felt so full and so quiet. The morning sky was washed clear by last night's rain. Flags stirred in a lazy breeze. Pine garland hung across the gazebo, its scent mingling with damp wood. Voices hushed like they do in churches, because this wasn't spectacle. It was gratitude. Nathan stood near the steps, one hand on Argo's shoulder. The shepherd's coat gleamed, stitches on his flank, neat as tracks. No bandana, no ornament, only the scar above his eye, the calm of one who had endured. When Nathan looked down, amber eyes looked back. Argo leaned into his touch. "We made it." The townsfolk pressed close. Harold from the hardware store, Margaret with her pie tin, the deputy who'd bagged the pipe, the nurse who'd held her breath when alarms rang. Even the old men stood bareheaded. At the front, Evelyn crouched with Mira, ribbon bright in her hair. The girl kept her palm open for Argo's nose whenever the crowd grew too near. Each time he touched it, her shoulders eased. Sheriff Keating stepped to the rail. The mic squealed, then stilled. His voice carried without notes. "Ashwood, we gather to honor a life that chose to protect another. We've seen storms, but what happened by the tree line wasn't weather. It was hunger struck against innocence. And on the night it mattered, a dog stood where a wall should have been." He looked from Nathan to Argo. "I'm supposed to read a citation, but citations are ink. This was bone and breath." Mr. Voller, the blacksmith, brought forward a box and a leather collar. Inside lay a modest star, etched with valor. The collar, dark as bark, bore brass rivets and a steel ring burnished to hold light. Hidden within, he kept her safe. Keating descended carefully, aware pomp unsettles the worthy. Nathan knelt with Argo. The sheriff did the same. "Argo," he said softly, "on behalf of Ashwood, we present this medal and this collar. You never asked for thanks, but you've earned it." The medal slipped over fur and scar. The collar buckled into place. The crowd exhaled. Applause began tentative, then grew. Not stadium loud, but kitchen table loud, enough to say, "We saw. We remember." Argo didn't bark. And he only blinked and looked to Mira. She stepped forward, hand steady between his ears, whispered, "Come on, Argo." "Thank you." He closed his eyes, brief and sure. Cameras clicked. A reporter scribbled, "Ghost Dog of Ashwood awarded Medal of Valor." By evening, a national anchor would smile through the story. But here there were no anchors, only neighbors. Margaret passed napkins. Harold cleared his throat too loudly. Pie's not going to serve itself, breaking the spell gently. Nathan pressed his forehead to Argo's. You did it. You brought us all the way home. Keating raised the mic once more. This dog didn't walk out alone. A man opened his door, fed what was hungry, trusted what was fierce, believed a stray could be more. That matters. Nathan flushed, but Mira tugged his sleeve. Not today. Instead, she adjusted the medal until it lay centered on Argo's chest. Deplam, she whispered. Beautiful. His tail tapped once like a gavel, closing the moment. The crowd drifted into circles. Pie slices, coffee thermoses, hands on shoulders. Photographs captured what words could not. A girl's palm on a scarred head, a sheriff's hat tipped, a blacksmith's thumb over his work. Stories would leave the square like geese off a lake, quiet, then widening. Nathan let the town own its joy. Argo sat against his leg, receiving strokes, and whispered thanks. As the square thinned, Nathan lifted the collar's ring and read the line inside. He kept her safe. The words landed like a nail set true. He looked across the square. Deputies at the courthouse steps, Mira sharing pie with Evelyn, the sky drifting a pale cloud across blue. Home, he said. Argo tilted his head, puzzled but certain. The medal weighed little, the collar steady. The rest lived in the spaces between them. Porch light against fog, footprints fading, a child's dreams unshadowed. The high school band struck a halting march. Folks clapped offbeat and happy. Keating smiled rare. Mr. Voller wiped his eyes and pretended it was sweat. News vans waited at the curb, dishes aimed skyward. Somewhere a producer counted down. Somewhere else, a stranger paused in a kitchen to watch a shepherd with a scar, accept a medal he could not read. He didn't need to. The town had already written the words in bread, in light, in hands that showed up. When Mira stood, Argo stood. Nathan rose with them. The three walked off the gazebo, not as spectacle, but as answer. Applause swelled once more, then softened into ordinary talk, the way big moments do when a place chooses life again. By afternoon, the square would empty. By night, the cabin's floodlights would glow less like sentries, more like porch lamps. For now, the medal caught the sun, and Ashwood, stitched with woods and second chances, let its breath go. At home, the medal lay on the mantel, sunlight finding it each morning. Nathan hadn't placed it for display, but as balance. Beside it, a photo of Mira's palm on Argo's head, ribbon bright as a sigh. And beside that, Sarah smiling into a wind only she could see. Past, present, promise. The cabin breathed easier now. Locks remained, but fear no longer lived there. Morning light spilled across the rug where Argo slept, paws twitching in harmless dream. He no longer lay as a sentry, but as one who belonged. Mira padded barefoot from the guest room, scarf draped like a cape. She stopped by the hearth. "Ciao, Boisang," she whispered. "Good morning." Argo thumped his tail without opening his eyes. Nathan was in the kitchen, grinding beans by hand. He poured water slow, the scent of coffee mingling with cedar. Mira climbed onto a stool, quiet in the mornings, as the house had learned to be. He slid toast and a saved slice of pie toward her. "Can I help with something?" she asked. "You can help me choose," Nathan said. "Fence or bookcase?" She weighed the choice carefully. "Bookcase." The one for the window. They moved to the workbench. Nathan laid planks. Mira sorted screws, tapping a rhythm like a lullaby. She steadied herself when the drill whirred, guiding the first screw. "Perfect," he said, and meant it. They built in quiet harmony. She brushed sawdust into sunshafts. When the shelf stood square, he pressed it into place and felt the rightness of fit. Craft had always been prayer. Today it sounded like gratitude. She placed the first drawing. A forest with space, a sky more blue than grey, a dog sleeping, not guarding. The faceless figure was gone. Some absences are worth framing. By late morning, the yard warmed. Cameras and floodlights stood quiet, no longer eyes but fixtures. Nathan set a picnic on the steps, apples, cheese, bread. Argo padded out, pausing at the threshold. "You live here," Nathan told him. "The door's yours too." Argo stretched one paw in the shade, one in the sun. Mira leaned against Nathan's shoulder as she ate, trusting gravity and him alike. Fatherhood stirred in him again, old, not broken. It frightened him, the way hope always does when it returns. But it steadied him too. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "Most nights." A beat. "Last night too." He followed her gaze to Argo. "Because of him?" he asked. "And you?" she said, not looking away, as if she were measuring truth by how it sounded in the air. "And the lights. But mostly because when I woke up, nobody left." He swallowed. That sentence fit into a place in him that had been empty for too long. "No one's leaving," he said. "Not in the middle. Not at the end." He realized then he wasn't just making a promise to her. He was making it to the dog, to the photograph on the mantel, to the man he still wanted to be, if given another chance. After lunch, Mira helped him plant 2 saplings along the edge of the yard, maples he'd meant to put in years ago. She pressed the soil around each trunk with both hands, then patted it like you would a sleeping back, reassuring the roots. "Trees remember," she said solemnly, and he wondered whose wisdom she was borrowing. "Good," he answered. "We've got things worth remembering now." Inside, the afternoon settled like a quilt. Mira curled with a book near the new shelf, lips moving quietly as she sounded out lines. Argo sprawled on the rug, a paw laid over the toe of Nathan's boot. Nathan took down Sarah's photo and dusted the frame with the care of a man handling thin ice. He didn't speak out loud. The talk between the living and the gone is mostly made of nods. He set the photo back, and after a breath, slid it 2 inches to the left so the medal could sit centered, flanked by the girl in the new picture and the woman in the old one. The arrangement felt right, like a sentence that finally learned where its commas belonged. Evening drew long and gold across the floorboards. Evelyn and Mark arrived with a casserole and a shy awkwardness that families wear around thresholds of new arrangements. They ate at the table. Conversation stayed simple. When it was time to go, Evelyn knelt to Mira's height, searching her daughter's face for any shadow. There were always shadows, but they were thinner now. Edges where light could get in. "Mai me lai quanye," she said. "I'll come again tomorrow." Mira hugged her long, then let go without panic. That was its own ceremony. When the door closed, the house exhaled into a quieter shape. 3. Nathan set another log on the fire. Mira carried her toothbrush to the sink, humming something that had no melody but still counted as song. Argo circled his bed once, a quilt Nathan had patched that afternoon, and lowered himself with a sigh so content it felt like a benediction. "Story?" Mira asked from the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Short one," Nathan said. He told a tale about a carpenter who found a ghost dog, and how the dog turned out to be the living kind after all, and how sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay. He left out the dark parts. Stories can remember without repeating. When he finished, she stood on tiptoe to adjust the medal on the mantel so it wouldn't tilt. "Dep," she said again, and padded off to bed. Nathan lingered by the fire. Argo watched him with that soft, questioning look, head tilted slightly. Nathan sat on the floor so they could meet eye to eye. "I didn't know there was room left," Nathan said, the truth plain as wood grain. "Turns out there was." Argo laid his muzzle across Nathan's knee. No growl, no watchfulness, only the warm weight of trust. The old ghost was gone. In his place lay a dog with a home. Later, when the lamps were off and the floodlights carved their harmless cones onto the grass, Nathan paused at the bedrooms, one breath at Mira's door, listening to the steady tide of a child's sleep, one at the corner where Argo had chosen his spot, listening to that deeper, slower rhythm dogs use to say, "I am here." He reached up and touched the mantel's edges, a silent inventory. Woman, girl, medal. He did not pray. He didn't have to. The house had already learned the prayer by heart. Outside, the woods kept their own counsel. Inside, 3 heartbeats balanced the room. Family, he thought, testing the word in his chest. It fits. And in the hush that followed, something old settled, and something new began. The woods of Ashwood finally slept. For weeks they had held their breath, branches stiff with secrets, shadows alive with menace. Now, under the pale wash of a late autumn moon, they exhaled. The wind through the maples was no longer a whisper of warning, but the easy sigh of leaves settling before winter. Inside the cabin, the air carried the warm scent of cedar logs popping in the fire. The hearth's glow painted soft light across the walls, reaching into corners that had once held fear. The medal of valor on the mantel caught the flicker, gleaming in rhythm with the flames. Beside it, Mira's drawing, forest, sky, and a dog at peace, sat propped against a bookend. Upstairs, Mira slept. Her breathing was steady, even, the rhythm of a child who no longer woke to screams. For nights on end, terror had clawed her awake, dreams replaying a faceless figure and the stink of gasoline. But tonight, her small hands rested unclenched against the quilt. The ribbon she once gripped like a lifeline now lay draped loosely across her pillow, soft and ordinary, no longer an anchor against fear, but a keepsake of survival. Nathan lingered below by the fire, a mug cooling in his hands. He wasn't drinking, just holding it, because some nights needed the ritual, the weight of something warm between his palms. He leaned back in the chair Sarah used to favor, the one that creaked when she rocked too hard. The sound once carried loneliness. Tonight, it carried the memory without ache. He looked into the flames and thought of the girl upstairs, the dog at his feet, and the strange, merciful way life stitches together what feels too torn to mend. Argo lay stretched on the rug, his body slack for the first time since Nathan had known him. His chest rose and fell in a deep, steady rhythm. His ears, once always pricked to the edge of sound, now drooped in easy surrender. The scar above his eye caught the firelight, but it no longer looked like a wound. It looked like history, folded into the whole of him, neither hidden nor demanding. For so many nights, the shepherd had lived on vigilance. He had lain across thresholds, eyes burning, muscles wired, breath taut. He had carried the weight of silence like armor, guarding what no one else could see. Now his muzzle rested on his paws, lips twitching faintly with some dream that carried no threat. His tail flicked once against the rug, not in warning, but in contentment. Nathan studied him with something close to reverence. He thought of that first morning in the fog, the body of a child beneath the dog's shield. He thought of the scar, the growl, the fight in the mud. But more than any of that, he thought of this moment, this stillness, this release. He leaned forward, setting the mug aside, and rested a hand gently on Argo's back. The fur was warm, the body beneath it strong, alive, whole. "Rest, boy," Nathan whispered. "You've earned it." Argo didn't stir, didn't lift his head. His eyes stayed closed, his breathing steady. But Nathan felt the faintest pressure as the shepherd's muscles shifted beneath his palm, a silent acknowledgement. A reply given not in growl or bark, but in peace. And the fire burned low, casting shadows that danced slow and harmless along the walls. Outside, the woods cradled the cabin instead of watching it. Inside, a child dreamed without fear. A man found fatherhood rising again like dawn, and a dog, once a ghost in the trees, lay quiet at last. Because when the danger was gone, so was his silence. When we look back at this story, it isn't only about danger and survival. It's about the quiet, unshakable love that dogs, especially German shepherds, carry in their hearts. They protect without question, heal without words, and remind us that loyalty is something you can feel in a pair of steady eyes beside you. Maybe it leaves you thinking about your own dog, the little ways they've stood guard over your life, or the comfort they've given you in hard moments. If you'd like to explore ways of deepening that bond, I've found a gentle resource that shares ideas and practices for connecting more meaningfully with our four-legged companions. I'll leave the link here for you to check out if it speaks to you. Take it as a simple invitation, nothing more. Sometimes the most lasting change comes not from grand gestures, but from the quiet moments we choose to honor with those who walk faithfully beside us.